The sky was dark, filled with cold clouds, and rain poured like needles from above. Her feet were bare, bleeding from sharp rocks, and her cloak was torn and soaked. She held a small bundle close to her chest, her child, coughing weakly with every breath. She had knocked on 11 doors already, and every single one had shut without mercy. No aliens allowed, one voice had said. Go back to your filthy kind, another had shouted. Some didn't even open the door, just let silence speak their hatred. The 12th door stood before her now, tall and painted red. She raised a shaking hand and knocked, her voice barely a whisper, please, please help us, just for the night. My daughter is sick. There was movement behind the door. A light flickered, a shadow passed. She heard the sound of a latch turning. Hope sparked inside her heart, but then slam. The door shut harder than all the others, as if to scream louder than words. You are not welcome. Her knees gave out. She dropped to the wet ground. Clutching the small body tighter, the girl in her arms coughed again, her skin cold and pale. The mother wept softly, her tears mixing with the rain, her voice shaking. Don't leave me now. I can't lose you too. She looked up at the sky, her eyes begging the stars that didn't answer. 12 rejections, 12 doors, 12 broken hopes. Her heart was too tired to hope for a 13th. But something inside her whispered, just one more. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see one more small house down the road. Its lights were still on, warm and golden through the windows. With all the strength she had left, she crawled forward, one step, then another, knees scraping the muddy ground. Her child didn't cry anymore. Just lay limp, breathing faintly. She reached the front steps of the 13th house. She couldn't even stand anymore, so she raised her voice while kneeling in the mud. Please, please show mercy. We have nowhere else to go. For a moment, nothing happened. She closed her eyes and waited for silence or another door to slam. But instead, heard a creak. The sound of a wooden door slowly opening. A man stood there, wearing a simple jacket, a towel in his hand. His face was tired. But his eyes weren't cold like the others. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her. Looked at the child in her arms, and then, without a word, he stepped outside into the rain. He bent down, knelt beside her, and placed the towel over the child gently. Come in, he said quietly. Before she freezes, she couldn't believe it was she dreaming. Her lips moved, but no sound came. He reached forward, helping her up with both hands. She was so light from hunger and weakness that he could almost lift her. He guided her into the warm house. Closing the door behind them, the smell of soup, firewood, and safety filled her senses. The human man, his name was Ethan, didn't ask many questions at first. He just laid the child on a soft couch near the fireplace and covered her in blankets. He handed the alien mother a cup of warm tea, her hands shaking as she took it. She stared at the human as if he were some strange creature from a dream. Why did you open the door? She asked, her voice small. Ethan looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. Because someone had to, he replied, and nobody else did. Tears ran down her face again, but this time they were different. Not tears of pain, but of relief, of being seen, of not being treated like dirt. She told him her name was Lyra, and her daughter's name was Naya. They were from a planet destroyed in war. She had traveled across space, found this colony, hoped that humans might be kinder, but 12 doors had proved her wrong. Ethan didn't judge her. He just listened, nodded, and placed more wood in the fire. He brought medicine from his cabinet, wrapped Naya in dry towels, and for the first time in days, Laura felt warm again, not just her skin, but her heart. She looked at him, her voice full of emotion. I thought humans hated our kind. Ethan gave a soft smile. Some do, but not all of us lost our hearts. The child stirred for the first time in hours. A small breath escaped her lips, and her fingers twitched under the blanket. Laura gasped and leaned closer, her own hands trembling. She's still alive. Ethan nodded. She has a chance now, because you didn't give up. Laura stared at him, still unable to believe that the 13th door, the final door, was the only one with kindness behind it and outside. The cold rain kept falling, but inside, the warmth had finally begun. Ethan gently laid the child on the couch, wrapping her in a thick blanket. Laura stood nearby, her hands still shaking, unsure if she was safe for just dreaming. The room was small but warm, filled with a crackle of firewood and soft yellow light. It felt like another world after the storm outside. She looked around, eyes wide, heart pounding. A wooden shelf with books, a half-eaten sandwich on the table, and a steaming pot on the stove. It wasn't a rich man's home, but it was full of peace. And for someone like Hersamon, who had begged under the rain, felt like heaven. Ethan knelt by the fire and tossed in another log. He didn't ask questions, didn't accuse or stare with disgust. He simply turned to her and said, "Sit, warm up." She did as he said, her legs weak, her body still wet and cold. After a moment, he placed a warm mug into her hands. "Sweet tea with honey. Drink this," he said softly. "It'll help you breathe easier." She took a slow sip and felt warmth spread through her chest. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them away. "Why? Why did you help me?" she finally asked. Ethan looked at her for a long second. "You came to my door. You asked for help, but so did the other doors," Laura whispered. 12 of them. "All closed. I'm not them," Ethan said, voice calm but firm. "Then why me?" She pressed again. "You could have shut the door too." Ethan sat back in the chair and sighed. "You reminded me of someone," he said quietly, staring into the fire. Laura waited, but he didn't explain further. Instead, he stood and walked to the child, checking her pulse and breathing. "Your daughter. What's her name?" "Naya," she answered. "She's only 6 years old." Ethan nodded, brushing Naya's wet hair away from her forehead. "She's burning up. Her fever's high." He stood and went to a cabinet, pulling out some old medicine. "This might help," he said, opening a small bottle. "It's not alien approved, but it's all I've got." Laura stared at the pills and whispered, "Thank you." She watched him as he moved, simple, quiet, not rich or powerful. But there was something in his eyes, something gentle. He didn't act like she was a creature or a burden or a threat. He treated her like a person. She finally spoke again, voice trembling. "We used to live on El Carnine. My husband died in the last wave of bombings." Her hands tightened on the mug. "I escaped with Naya. We were on a refugee ship, but it broke apart near this planet. We landed here 2 weeks ago." Ethan listened without interrupting, just nodding as she spoke. "I tried to find shelter. I thought maybe humans would be different. But," her voice cracked, "I was wrong." Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You weren't wrong," he said. "You just hadn't found the right human yet." Laura looked down, her eyes wet. "I knocked on 12 doors. And I almost didn't knock on yours, but you did," he said. "And now she has a chance." He pointed toward the small girl, who now breathed a little easier. "You saved her by not giving up." Laura covered her mouth as a small sound escaped her lips, half cry, half laugh. "I thought I was cursed," she said. "Everyone treated me like dirt. I started to believe I deserved it." "You don't," Ethan said simply. "You're not dirt. You're a mother doing everything she can." For the first time since she landed on this world, she believed him, and it made her cry again, but this time she didn't hide her tears. He didn't mock her or turn away. He just let her cry in peace. After a while, she looked up at him again. "You said I reminded you of someone." Ethan nodded slowly, standing and walking to a shelf. He pulled out a small photo and handed it to her. It was a picture of a woman human. Strong eyes, soft smile, and a little girl beside her. My wife and daughter, he said, voice tight. They died in a shuttle crash. 2 years ago, Laura looked down at the photo, her heart heavy. I'm sorry, she whispered. Ethan gave a sad smile. So am I, but maybe. Helping you and your daughter. Maybe that means something. Laura placed the photo back in his hand carefully. She finally understood why his door had opened, why his eyes had been different. He had known loss too, and because of that, he could recognize it in someone else. I don't have much, Ethan said. But as long as you're under this roof, you're safe. Laura's voice cracked as she said, You're the only human who saw me as someone. He smiled again. Softly, you're not someone, Laura. You're a mother. And I respect that. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, the fire still burned. And the child breathed easier. And for the first time in days, Laura didn't feel like a beggar. She felt human. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat beside the couch, watching little Naya breathe slow, shallow, uneven. Her skin was still pale, and the fever hadn't broken. Laura rested in a chair nearby, but even in her sleep, her fingers held Naya's small hand tightly. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the fire crackling and the soft wheezing of the child's breath. Ethan placed a cold cloth on her forehead and whispered, Hang in there, kid. Your mother's been through too much to lose you now. Morning came slowly. With gray skies and heavy fog outside, Laura woke up with a jolt, eyes immediately searching for her daughter. When she saw Naya still alive, she let out a sigh of relief. She's still burning up, Ethan said softly, handing her a warm cup. Laura held the drink with both hands and asked, Will she make it? Ethan didn't answer right away. He rubbed his forehead and looked out the window. She needs real medicine. Something strong, something for her species. Laura nodded slowly. I know, but there's no alien clinic here, he added. This town doesn't accept refugees. She looked down, silent. I have a contact, Ethan continued. An old friend, a former military doctor. He treats aliens. He doesn't ask questions, Ethan replied, but calling him? It's risky. Laura's grip on the mug tightened. What kind of risk? Ethan sighed. He's not exactly legal anymore. Got kicked out of the service for helping the wrong kind of people. Aliens like us, she whispered. He nodded. I can call him, but if the town finds out, they'll report me. Could be prison. The room went silent again. Laura stood up, her voice trembling. Then don't do it. You've done enough already. I didn't say I wouldn't. Ethan said, standing too. I'm just telling you what we're dealing with. He picked up his old communicator from the shelf and looked at her. You still want me to call? Him, she didn't even hesitate. She's my child, she said. I'll take the blame if it comes to that. But I won't let her die. Ethan nodded and turned on the device. He sent out a signal with a short message, Need help. No questions. Urgent. Then he waited, pacing the room. Minutes passed like hours until a message pinged back. Coming at dusk. Bring the girl. That evening, Ethan took a rusted hover truck from his garage. Laura wrapped Naya in blankets again and sat in the back seat, holding her close. They drove through the fog, down empty dirt roads, away from the colony's main streets. Ethan avoided cameras and checkpoints, cutting through old farming paths. Finally, they arrived at a crumbling barn outside town, hidden between tall dead trees. Inside, a man in a dark coat stood waiting, bald, gruff, with sharp eyes. He didn't smile when he saw Ethan, but he nodded. You still attract trouble, huh? Ethan smirked. Only the meaningful kind. The man looked at Laura and then at the child in her arms. Zero-born. Right. Looks bad. Laura held Naya closer. She's burning up. I tried everything. No need to explain. The doctor interrupted. Opening his case, "I've treated worse." He placed a small scanner over Naya's body, and it beeped softly. Then he injected her with 2 different vials, speaking more to himself. Septic fever, likely from stress, starvation, environmental shock. She's lucky to still be alive. He looked up at Ethan. "You brought her just in time." Laura's eyes widened. "Will she live?" The doctor nodded. "She'll sleep for a day or 2. "But yeah, she'll make it." Laura couldn't stop. The tears this time, she buried her face into Naya's blanket and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you both." The doctor packed up, then turned to Ethan. "You know, if anyone finds out you helped aliens again, they'll come after you." Ethan shrugged. "Let them come." The doctor looked at him for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Still the same fool," he muttered with a tiny grin. Then he disappeared into the fog. Back at the house, Laura helped Ethan carry Naya inside. The child was sleeping deeply now, her breathing finally calm. Laura placed her on the couch again and sat beside her, gently brushing her cheek. Ethan poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Laura. She took it, but didn't speak for a moment. Then she turned to him and said, "You didn't have to risk this. Why are you doing all this?" Ethan looked into his cup, thinking, I thought I was alone in this world," he said. "Until you knocked on my door." Laura tilted her head, confused. "I saved your daughter's life today. But in some strange way, you reminded me how to be human again." She stared at him, eyes soft and filled with emotion. "I thought all humans hated us. Maybe most do," he said. "But not all. Not me." The fire warmed the room again as night fell. Outside, the world was still cold and cruel, but inside Ethan's home, something had changed. A promise had been made, and a choice had been taken. He would protect them, no matter what. Morning. Sunlight pushed through the curtains, but Ethan didn't smile. He stood near the front door, arms crossed, eyes staring at the muddy footprints on his porch. Someone had been there in the night, and it wasn't a friend. Inside, Laura slept on the small mattress Ethan had given her. Naya was still wrapped in blankets, her fever nearly gone. Peace should have filled the house, but instead, a strange silence hung in the air. Ethan opened the door and looked around. A small rock sat near the step, and something was written on it in red paint. "Get out. Nitrogen monoxide aliens." He picked it up slowly, lips tightening. This wasn't the first time his neighbors had done something ugly, but this time it was personal. He stepped back in, tossed the rock into the trash, and boiled water for tea. When Laura woke up, she noticed his tight jaw and asked, "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer at first, but finally said, "Just people being people." She stood beside him, frowning. "You should have let me leave after the medicine." "Ethan, I should have let you freeze on my porch too," he replied calmly. She looked down, ashamed. "That's not what I meant," she whispered. "I know," he said. "Softer now, but you're staying." "I already decided that." Later that day, while Ethan was gathering firewood outside, a voice called to him. It was Gerald, his neighbor from 2 houses down, an older man with sharp eyes and a cold smile. "Got some strange guests lately, Ethan?" Gerald said casually. Ethan didn't reply. Gerald stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think we don't notice? Alien filth crawling around your house. You trying to get the whole town infected?" Ethan dropped the wood with a loud thud. "Go home, Gerald," but the man didn't move. "Some of us are thinking of reporting this. You're breaking colony laws, harboring off-worlders without permit." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low but hard. "She's a mother. The girl was dying." "That's not our problem," Gerald snapped. "Your sympathy is going to ruin this place for the rest of us. Maybe this place needs some ruining," Ethan muttered. Gerald glared at him. Then threw a final warning. "You've been warned. Don't expect help when the patrols come knocking. Then he walked off, boots crunching on the gravel. Back inside, Laura had heard part of it. She sat silently by the window, hugging her knees. "I shouldn't be here," she said when Ethan entered. "You're not the problem," he replied. "I'm the reason they'll turn on you." Ethan sat down across from her. "They were already this way. You just gave them a reason to show their true face." That night, as the wind picked up outside, a loud crack hit the window, glass shattered, and a brick rolled across the floor. Laura screamed and shielded Naya instinctively. Ethan rushed to the door and swung it open, but no one was there. Just the sound of footsteps fading into the night on the brick. More red paint. Last warning. Ethan patched the window with boards, then turned to Laura. "They want you out," he said bluntly. She nodded, already expecting it. "I'll leave in the morning." "No," Ethan cut her off. "You're not leaving. I have one more idea." The next day, he drove into the nearby town, not to hide, but to confront. He stopped outside the mayor's small office, walked in, and demanded a meeting. Mayor Hadley, a tired man with too much pride, looked up, annoyed. "What is it now, Ethan?" "I want to speak at the next town gathering," Ethan said. The mayor raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "I want to talk about what it means to be human." Hadley laughed. "You mean about harboring illegal aliens?" "I mean about saving a life. You think that's illegal now?" After a long pause, the mayor sighed. "Fine. You want to embarrass yourself? Go ahead. You get 5 minutes tomorrow night." Ethan left, but his heart raced. This wasn't just about Laura and Naya anymore. It was about the kind of people they had become, and the kind of man he chose to be. Back home, Laura stood by the window, her face lit by soft evening light. She didn't speak, but Ethan could tell she was worried. "I'm going to speak tomorrow," he said. "About what?" she asked. "About you," he replied. "About kindness. About what kind of world I want to live in." She stared at him, unsure if she should feel grateful or terrified. "You're risking everything," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you and Naya, you're worth the risk." For the first time since arriving, Laura didn't argue. She just walked over to him, held his hand, and whispered, "Then I'll be there too." Outside, whispers grew in the shadows, but inside that house, two hearts stood together, ready to face the storm. The next morning was quiet, but not peaceful. The town was holding its breath, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. Inside Ethan's small home, Laura stood near the mirror, brushing her long dark hair with a trembling hand. She looked different, now clean, rested, and no longer broken. But in her eyes, something still flickered. A shadow from the past, something even warm tea and soft blankets couldn't erase. Naya was sleeping peacefully, a soft blanket tucked around her. The fever was gone, and her breathing was steady. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching Laura as she gently touched her daughter's cheek. "She's stronger than she looks," he said. Laura nodded. "She gets that from her father." There was silence for a moment. Then Ethan asked, "What was he like?" Laura smiled faintly, but it faded fast. He was a teacher. Quiet, smart. He used to read old stories from Earth. Believe it or not, Ethan tilted his head. "From Earth?" "Yes," she said softly. He believed that some humans had hearts greater than stars. She glanced up, eyes wet. "I didn't believe him until I met you." Ethan looked down, unsure how to respond. But then he asked the question that had been on his mind for days. "Who were you before all this?" Laura let out a slow breath and turned to the window. "I was called Scholar Laura Vailon of the Great Library of Elkarni," she began. "I studied xenolinguistics and interstellar law." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds impressive." "It was," she said quietly. "We helped keep peace between small colonies I used to teach children like Naya. Her voice cracked, and she looked away. When the war came, everything burned. The library, my work, my home. I became a refugee overnight. No title, no family. Just a mother running with her child. Ethan walked to the shelf and poured her a glass of water. "You're still a scholar," he said, "and still a mother." "But the world doesn't see me that way," Laura said bitterly. "They see a beggar. A creature, a danger." Ethan placed the glass in her hands. "I see someone brave enough to knock on 13 doors. She looked at him, surprised. "That takes more strength than any soldier I've ever known." He added, "You didn't run. You protected your child. You never gave up." Lyra stared into her glass, silent. "I used to give speeches before hundreds," she whispered. "Now, I'm afraid to look anyone in the eyes." "Then look at me," Ethan said. She lifted her head slowly, and he smiled. "Start with one." That evening, as the sun began to fall, Ethan placed a clean jacket on the table for her. "Wear this. We're going to that town meeting together." Laura hesitated. "I don't think I can speak." "You don't have to. Just stand beside me. Let them see the woman behind the rumors." She nodded, holding the jacket close. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for the tea or the fire or the medicine, but for treating me like I'm still someone." When they reached the meeting hall, all eyes turned. People whispered, stared, and frowned when they saw Laura walk in beside Ethan. Some even stepped back as if she carried disease. But Ethan stood tall, and Laura walked with her shoulders straight. She remembered her husband's words, "Be proud, even if the world spits on you." Mayor Hadley cleared his throat, annoyed. "You have 5 minutes, Ethan." Ethan stepped forward and looked at the gathered crowd. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He simply told the truth. "I know many of you are afraid," he began. "You think aliens are dangerous. You think they don't belong here." He paused, looking at their faces. "But what if you were wrong?" He pointed gently toward Laura. "She's a scholar, a teacher, a mother. Her daughter was dying. She knocked on 12 doors. Every one of you turned her away." A few heads lowered. Some faces hardened. Ethan continued. "I opened the 13th door. And what did I find? Not a threat, not a criminal, but someone more human than most people I know." He stepped closer to the front. "You say you're protecting your homes. But how do you protect a town by killing kindness?" One man in the crowd shouted, "She's not one of us." "She knocked anyway," Ethan replied calmly. "That makes her braver than all of us combined." Silence followed. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Laura as if seeing her for the first time. Ethan finished with one sentence. "You don't have to love her. You don't have to trust her, but at least stop fearing someone who only asked for help." He stepped down, and Laura followed him out. No one clapped. No one cheered, but no one threw rocks either, and that was enough. Back at the house, Naya opened her eyes for the first time in days. She looked around, confused. "Mom?" she whispered. Laura rushed to her side, tears falling freely. "Yes, baby. I'm here." She looked at Ethan, her voice full of emotion. "She's awake." Ethan smiled and whispered, "She's strong, just like her mother." Laura sat quietly at the table while Ethan boiled water for tea. The room was calm, but her thoughts were not. Her fingers gently traced the rim of her cup, and her eyes stared at nothing in particular. It had been many days since she last looked in a mirror and saw anything more than a tired face. Ethan noticed her silence and spoke softly, "You okay?" She nodded, but didn't smile. "I was just thinking," she said, voice low, "about who I used to be." Ethan sat across from her. "Curious? I'd like to know." He said, "If you're ready to tell me." Laura hesitated, then took a slow breath. "My full name is Laura Veelan. I was a cultural advisor and translator on El Carnine. Translator? Ethan asked. Yes. She nodded. I spoke 13 languages, and I was working on a 14th. My job was to help colonies understand each other before war began. That's a rare kind of job, Ethan said. Impressed, she gave a small smile, just for a moment. I thought if people talked more, they would fight less. I was wrong, her voice grew quieter, and her smile faded. When the war came, it didn't matter how many languages I knew. No one wanted peace. They wanted victory. She looked down at her hands. I was forced to flee with my daughter. Everything I ever built. Burned in hours, Ethan listened without interrupting, just letting her speak. On the refugee ship, no one cared who I was. I became just another alien mother with a child. She took a long sip of her tea. I told myself I'd survive. Vernaya. But as days passed and people pushed us away, I began to forget who I was. I began to feel worthless. Ethan leaned forward, his tone steady. You're not worthless, Laura. You don't know what it feels like, she said, eyes filling with tears, to go from being respected to being looked at like trash, like a threat, to knock on doors and be treated like you're not even alive. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I may not know what that feels like, but I do know what it's like to lose everything. Laura looked at him, surprised. He nodded slowly. I lost my wife and son in a fire. A wiring fault. Gone in minutes. Her lips parted, but no words came. He continued. For months, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't care if I ate, or worked, or lived. But one day, someone knocked on my door. A stranger. A refugee. And somehow, saving her saved me too. Laura stared at him, heart pounding. Was that me? He gave a small smile. That was you. Silence filled the space, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm. Like a silent understanding between two broken people who had begun to mend, Laura stood and walked to the window where fog clung to the grass outside. I used to believe my knowledge would change the galaxy, she said. But now I believe something else. What's that? Ethan asked. She turned around, her voice stronger. That kindness, real, quiet. Inconvenient kindness changes more than knowledge ever could. She walked to Naya, who was still asleep on the couch, and brushed her cheek. I want her to know I wasn't always a beggar. I want her to remember that her mother used to stand tall. She'll know, Ethan said firmly. She sees how you fight for her every day. That's the strongest thing any child can see. Laura swallowed hard and whispered, I want to be useful again. I don't want to hide. Then don't, Ethan said, standing. You're not hiding here. You're healing. And when you're ready, you'll stand again not as a beggar, but as the scholar you are. That afternoon, Laura took Ethan's notebook and pen. She sat at the table for hours. Writing, translating, mapping out alien scripts and common root words. Ethan watched her from across the room and smiled. She was focused, determined, her hands moving like they remembered what they were born to do. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and it brought life back into her eyes later that night. Naya woke for the first time with real strength in her voice. Mom, she whispered, her little hand reaching out. Laura rushed over, smiling through tears. I'm here, baby. Naya looked around the room, confused. Where are we? We're safe, Laura whispered. The humans saved us. Naya looked at Ethan. Blinking slowly. Thank you, she murmured. Before falling asleep again, Ethan stood quietly, emotion rising in his chest. Laura turned to him and said, she remembered you. He nodded, unable to speak. That night, for the first time, all three of them sat at the table. Ethan lit a candle, and Laura shared stories of old worlds. Her voice no longer cracked with fear, but with pride. And Ethan knew this woman wasn't a beggar at all. She was a leader, a teacher, a mother, and finally, God. She was starting to remember it too. The night was quiet to quiet. A cold wind moved through the trees. Ethan sat in his old armchair watching the fire, while Laura tucked Naya into the small bed near the couch. The child had eaten soup, smiled weakly, and even whispered a joke. Hope had returned to the house, but outside. Hatred hadn't gone away. Laura stood near the window, watching the dark. She felt it in her bones, something was coming. She whispered, "Ethan, do your neighbors always stay this silent?" He stood beside her and shook his head. "No, not when they're planning something." That night, Laura didn't sleep. She sat beside Naya, holding her hand, her eyes wide open. Ethan stayed awake, too, his old shotgun leaning against the wall. He wasn't a violent man, but he wasn't going to let anyone harm them either. Around midnight, the silence broke, a faint click. Then a sharp whoosh of air outside the house. Laura's head snapped up. Ethan rushed to the door and opened it, and his heart dropped. Flames. Orange, wild, and spreading fast. Someone had poured fuel along his porch and set it alight, the fire. He shouted. He grabbed a blanket and ran out, slamming it over the nearest flame. Laura rushed outside with a bucket of water, throwing it on the stairs. Smoke burned their lungs. Heat burned their faces, but neither of them stopped. Call for help. She screamed. "There won't be any help," Ethan growled, slapping at the fire with his coat. "They want this house to burn. They want you to burn." It took them 10 minutes to kill the flames. The porch was blackened, the steps ruined. But the house still stood, barely. Naya cried softly from the window. Watching her mother cough in the smoke, Ethan threw down the soaked, ruined coat and looked around. Dark figures moved in the distance, watching from shadows. He shouted into the night, "You think fire will scare me? You think you can burn away my humanity?" No answer, just silence. And then, laughter low, mocking, far away. They were gone before he could see who it was. Back inside, Laura sat down, shaking. Naya ran into her arms, and she held her tight. "I'm okay, baby." She whispered, "I'm okay." Ethan grabbed a cold drink from the kitchen, poured it over his red hands, and sat heavily in his chair. His eyes weren't calm anymore. They were burning too, with something deeper than anger. Rage. Laura looked at him. "This has to stop. We should leave tonight." Ethan's voice was low. "No, they want you to run. That's what cowards always want." "But Naya, she won't be safe anywhere unless we make this place safe," he said. "I've let this town walk over me for years. But this is the line." The next morning, Ethan didn't rest. He went to the colony office and demanded a public review of the attack. The guards laughed at first until he threw a piece of burned wood on their desk. "You can ignore it now," he said. "But what happens when they light the next house?" Later that afternoon, he stood in front of the town square. He placed a large board on the wall outside the market. On it, he pinned a picture of the burned porch. A simple message was written in bold letters. "This was my home. This is who you've become." People stopped to read it. Some looked ashamed. Others walked away without a word. But the town had been challenged openly. That evening, a knock came to Ethan's door. It wasn't a rock or a threat. It was a woman, human, older, from the local school. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what they did." She looked at Naya and handed Laura a clean blanket. "She can use this. I had it stored for winter." Laura didn't know what to say, but Ethan nodded. "Thank you." One by one. Small gestures followed. A loaf of bread left at the door. Old children's books. Even a broken heater someone dropped off. Not everyone changed overnight, but someone had. Because the fire hadn't just burned wood, it had burned through silence. It had lit something even more powerful. Awareness. Later that night, Laura sat beside Ethan on the porch. She looked at the blackened wood and said, "You risked everything for us." He looked out at the stars. "I risked everything." And finally remembered what it means to be human. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder. And for a moment, even with scars around them, the night felt safe again. Not because the world had changed, but because one man had refused to burn with it. Days passed after the fire, but the scent of smoke still clung to the walls. Ethan patched the porch with his own hands. The steps were crooked now, uneven but strong. Laura sat nearby, watching him work. Naya, finally smiling again, played quietly with a small wooden toy Ethan had carved from broken porch wood. There were no more rocks thrown at the windows. No more red paint warnings, and for the first time since Laura had arrived, the town had gone quiet, but this silence felt different. Not angry, not hateful, just thoughtful. A week after the fire, something strange happened. Another knock came at the door, soft, unsure. Ethan opened it and blinked in surprise. A young alien woman stood there, shivering in the morning wind. Her robes were torn, her face bruised. Behind her stood a small boy with wide green eyes and a swollen lip. "I heard about this house," she whispered. "They said it was safe." Ethan looked over his shoulder at Laura, who had already stood up and walked forward. Without hesitation, Laura reached out her hand and smiled. "You're home now." The woman burst into quiet sobs, falling to her knees. Ethan helped her inside, brought warm tea. Laura cleaned the boy's cuts and wrapped him in Naya's extra blanket. That evening, Ethan sat outside with a notebook in hand. He flipped the cover open and wrote, "Day 1, another door opened." That was how it began, not with speeches or law, but with action, quiet, firm and brave. In the next days, more came. A wounded male from a mining colony. A mother with twin children, all covered in dust. Even a human teen kicked out by his own family for helping aliens found shelter here. Ethan's house became more than a home. It became a place of healing, a place where names were remembered. Not labels, where no one asked, "What are you?" but instead, "How can I help you?" The neighbors still watched, some with fear, some with curiosity. But no one dared throw another rock. One day, the same mayor who once laughed at Ethan visited. He stood awkwardly at the gate. "I hear you've become some sort of center," he muttered. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and replied, "No, Mayor, I've just decided not to close my door anymore." The mayor cleared his throat. "There are rules, Ethan. There are people dying." "Mayor," he answered without fear. The mayor stared at the line of children drawing pictures on the porch. Kaylara, teaching them Earth language with chalk. On the steps, at Naya holding hands with a human child who had once been told to stay away from aliens. And for a second, even the mayor said nothing. Then he turned and left, but not before nodding once. Slowly, Laura watched all of it quietly that night. When the house was full of soft breathing and snoring, she sat beside Ethan near the repaired window. "I never imagined this," she whispered. Ethan looked around the room, at the small sleeping figures wrapped in borrowed blankets. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But maybe we never needed to imagine it. Maybe we just needed to act." Laura smiled. "You've changed everything." Ethan shook his head. "No, you knocked. You were brave enough to hope, even after 12 rejections." I just had the sense to open the 13th door. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Ethan looked at her, eyes soft. "Thank you for reminding me what being human truly means." In the days that followed, Laura's title returned not from papers or governments, but from the people in the house. They called her teacher. They came to her with questions, stories, dreams, and Ethan. He became something more too. Not just a man with an open door, but a protector, a guide, a quiet hero, and little Naya. She drew a picture with her crayons one day and showed it to Ethan. It had a sun, a house with a heart over the door, and 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one smaller, one with hair like Laura's. Ethan pointed to himself and asked, "Who's this one?" Naya smiled. "That's you," she said. "That's my human." He couldn't speak for a moment, so he just pulled her into a hug and whispered, "I'll always be your human." And outside, the town kept changing slowly, stubbornly, but the house with the 13th door never closed again. It remained open for those who had been forgotten, for the rejected, the unwanted, the invisible. Because one day, long ago, a broken mother dared to knock, and one human dared to answer.